if you just want to bring that to a close just now. Has everyone got something? Something? Okay. Now if you just want to turn to your neighbour, I think we've got a, maybe we'll have 1-3 as well. So maybe if you guys could go in a 3 and just have a short discussion about what that point is and what that meant for you. So if you two just go together as well. One thing that has changed is trust in my colleagues both to deliver. To deliver their work, but also to provide quality. It's always been multiple standards. That's sort of one of the issues that I had in class earlier on in the piece was thinking within the assessed, particularly when I was actually it's exceeded my expectations. So I think I've learned to trust with as a result of which is good, because that's sort of a large change to traditional and
people were kind of like so that's actually a challenge. Like working out how to do it in the future. Because I think
it's funny, I was interested in seeing that perspective. You know, I actually want to get those taken up. Because I think to be conscious of how we communicate with each other. You know, you had to highlight that. And I sort of took that on board, but I hadn't really thought of it as a master. You see, one of the issues, did it work well?
I'm not saying I want to see if I should include it anyway, because I know it's be fast.
Okay, so you just want to draw your discussion. Did you manage to? Okay. Are you okay? Sorry to cut you short. If you want to continue.
No, that's okay.
All right.
It's all right. I got Nikki's because you get me.
So just wanted to ask if anyone would like to feedback about any similarities or commonality between you. Maybe, I don't know if the group of 3 have any sort of similar points. What kind of thing came up for you there?
It was all really about expectations. We all had set expectations of what it was going to be, and it wasn't, and that's kind of taught us to sort of come into things with a bit of an open mind and not to have a set.
Okay, that's interesting. Where do you think those expectations came from, generally speaking? Do you think that that's from prior learning environments? Yeah. So school, higher education as well? Okay, did you all have a similar experience of what that is as well, and how that was taught? Okay.
We sat there, we got lectured to, you read notes, and somebody for the next, you know what I mean? That's what we thought we were coming to the first night, and then we got thrown this massive curveball, and you look at it in a totally different light now.
Okay, that's really interesting, thanks. Does anyone else want to feedback on what they talked about between themselves?
You sort of agreed that it was sort of around about the 3rd week that sort of felt a bit more comfortable and realised what we were the way we were going and what we were doing, and you felt that that was around about the time that you felt you could speak more and more comfortable. And
okay, thanks very much. Next, what about you guys? Did you have a discussion about what you found from this question?
Before we took this course, I thought if I can get a master's degree, my goal is achieved. But after taking this course, I think lifelong learning is like this. I cannot stop learning.
it's like more now. That's huge.
Great. Anything to say?
So, fragmentation, we also want to go to the third age university when we get there.
You've got a long-term aim. And following off, did you have a shot at that?
We had sort of different issues. Like my personal one was sort of along the lines of expectations, but I had a real trust issue, which hit a value and actually overcame a value and built a lot of trust out of this particular program course. So, big change for me.
Ralph, did you, from a different perspective?
Yeah, I'm not sure I've got a perspective transformation per se, but I've come at it with sort of a challenge to myself to think about more deeply the balance of the international students being in the class. I think that was something that I was, because I was slightly, as I was saying to Paul, slightly step back from the process. You guys were like engaged, and I was able to step back and observe what was going on. And I think the challenge that I have is, sorry, I'm being so incredibly articulate here, but the challenge that I have is working out how to keep the energy in the class, a lot of which comes from speed of work and speed of communication, and at the same time recognise that there are people who need to be engaged in that process. And how do you balance that? And I was, I'm certainly not pointing any fingers at all. And if I'm pointing any fingers at myself as well, because I tend to be totally into that fast, let's move on, let's work, let's do it kind of process as much as anybody else is. So it's just, if I was doing it again, how do I do it? So
it's really interesting in terms of what we're going to come on to with critical reflection as an educator as well as a learner. It's really important that as well to come back to it. But thanks very much for engaging in that. So we just want to move on a little bit to, so this guy here. This is Jack Mezirow, or John, what about Jack? And he, in 1978, wrote an article called Perspective Transformation, and it appeared in Adult Education Quarterly in the States. And he basically came up with, I'm not going to say came up with, he did some empirical research on a lot of women returners to community colleges in America. The reason that he wanted to do that was because he had observed his wife, Edie, who had returned to try and gain her undergraduate degree after quite a long spell out of education. And he noticed that some things were cropping up that he noticed were she was approaching it differently than perhaps someone going straight through education. So yeah, there's quite a lot of quotes from him because he is the main sort of exponent of this. So as there are no truths or definitive knowledge, and because circumstances change, the human condition may be best understood as a continuous effort to negotiate contested meanings. So there's a lot in that, but the notion that this transformative learning theory is a continuous development and that it's ongoing all the time is quite an important one to get to. Another way that he says it, which is perhaps a little bit clearer, is transformative learning involves learning to think critically by questioning assumptions and expectations that shape and influence what we think and do. Okay, so that's a real, probably the most nutshell one we could find about transformative learning theory. So that's very important. I'll read it again. Transformative learning involves learning to think critically by questioning assumptions and expectations that shape and influence what we think and do. Okay, so the fact that you would come in with all these expectations and these assumptions about what it is important in terms of thinking back about what it is that you expected or why you thought it was like that. Okay, so being able to be critical about those things. Okay, so just going to see what's next. So after, as Masaro said, the sort of after this empirical research, he actually did. He was in direct contact with 12 colleges wider to that, there was 24 programmes that he was sort of getting information back from about the women returners. And wider to that, there was about 314 or so colleges that he was in mail contact with. So all this research was coming back in terms of questionnaires as to what people expect. Basically, a questionnaire along the terms of what we just asked you, so what your expectations were, what you're finding now. And out of that, he came up with 10 phases or dynamics that adult returners go through, particularly women in America, adult returning to community college. So, and this might strike a chord with some of the stuff that you've just talked about as well. Thanks for bearing with us, though it's getting a bit heated as well. So number one, a disorientating dilemma. So something in your life that makes you think, hang on, things aren't sitting quite right here. I'm not absolutely sure if I'm on the right track. Perhaps that's the undergraduate degree that I did, or the learning that I had wasn't appropriate to where I want to take my next step of education, or the rest of my life really. A self-examination with feelings of guilt or shame. So almost in tandem with the disorientating dilemma, examining oneself in order to elicit some feelings of shame, guilt. There's also fear and anger that come into this as well. So there's quite an emotional response to this disorientating dilemma. A critical assessment of epistemic, socio-cultural or psychic assumptions. So epistemic, tour of knowledge, epistemology being study of knowledge, socio-cultural being, of course, the social and the cultural combined, one's place in human interaction and culture, or psychic assumptions, which is not clairvoyance. It's much more to do with mental process and states. So recognition of and also for recognition of one's discontent and the process of transformation are shared, and that others have negotiated similar change. So that's quite important in terms of entering into education again. The fact that you know someone who's done it, or you've seen someone enter into who's had a good experience, or someone who's gone on then to do something else. I mean, I was thinking about Ian, because your friend who had done this course, there's a model there that you can base that on. You know, it's someone who has actually achieved what you want to achieve. Exploration of options for new roles, relationships and actions. So that's basically, when you do that Google search of teaching adults for the first time, before you heard about the course or anything like that, you're beginning to sort of find out about where can I put myself in educational terms, where can I go? Is it Glasgow? Should Glasgow be the right place for me? You're beginning to experiment with the new role that you might have. Okay, planning a course of action. So that's actually getting engaged in it, and beginning to actually make a plan. Then ultimately, what we're doing just now, acquisition of knowledge and skills for implanting one's plans. So actually doing the study, going to the place, doing the thing in a very hands-on way. Then we've got provisional, trying of new roles. So beginning to adopt some of these things that we're learning. So beginning to beginning to employ them in our day-to-day lives, beginning to use the knowledge that we've got, maybe in conversation, but maybe more in a social role kind of way. Building of competence and self-confidence in new roles and relationships. So there's a difference between competence and self-confidence, but they run in tandem. So we've got perhaps if on placement, if we're becoming in the teaching adults program, if we become more competent and we become more self-confident at the same time, that's one of the phases that Mezirow noticed in his transformational learning studies. A reintegration into one's life on the basis of conditions dictated by one's perspective. So that's really reintegrating back in to what you were doing before, with the cumulative acquisition of this knowledge. So you've got all this toolkit with you, and you've brought it back into, say it was training. You're going to bring that back into your work role. Yeah. So this was all 1978. So this was the one study in 1978, along with some other sort of longer career things that he'd done. In 1994, though, he added So, as well as a reintegration, we've also got a renegotiating relationships and negotiating new relationships based on the acquisition of knowledge. So you've gone through something, and actually maybe your relationships that existed before have to be renegotiated. Maybe you've learned something that now has to be applied differently. And negotiating new relationships. So when you come to meeting someone, you bring that toolkit, that knowledge with you as well. So that all those things in a social way are really important. Good, so that's his 10. Further to that, he broke those 10 down into 4 sort of levels in the phases. So elaborating existing frames of reference, and that's frames of reference that you already had when you arrived at a course of study perhaps. Learning new frames of reference, which is pretty self-explanatory. Transforming points of view, so perhaps looking at feminism becomes, you look at it from different angles as well. Something expands and then your point of view becomes more diverse. And transforming habits of the mind. So that means that when you come into a new situation, it's not that you have to think about doing the thing that you've learned. It's that it just becomes a habit, that you become transformed. Really, is the way that it's said.